Welcome to another executive interview for Becoming Retail. Becoming Retail is a content series where we look into the hearts and minds of retail leaders, especially during this changing industry and amidst digital transformation. I am extremely excited to have Nicola here. Nicola Thompson is the COO of Made.com. She has over 20 years of experience in e-commerce. So I'm really excited to dive into her life lessons and get her take on the retail industry. In our previous conversations, she has expressed how focused she is on the customer. And that's definitely a theme that we're seeing come out of all of these executive interviews. I'm excited to get her opinion on that. But before we begin, I'd like to welcome her to the content series and learn how she got started in retail. So please.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and great to be talking to you guys. So Excellent. how did I get into retail? What inspired me to get into retail? Mm-hmm. I think it was a really good question to have because it really forced me to go right back to what did inspire me to get into retail. And you know what? I think I was one of these kids that from a really early age, I was fascinated by the idea of selling things to people. And I can remember even at school, I when there was a big trend for like hair scrunchies, I started making hair scrunchies and selling them. So this idea of spotting a trend mm-hmm. and then kind of capitalizing on that by selling something, I think was like really early stage for me. I've spent my entire career in retail. From my first Saturday job, I started working in a clothes shop in my local town. And I can always remember being that, painful member of staff who was like, where do the clothes come from though? And why is that color? And why do we put that at the front of the rack? And why does this one go at the back of the rack? So I think I was just fascinated by the whole system of it right from the word go and have remained so ever since really. And then kind of progressed through that career and got into e-commerce at a fairly early stage. And I've always been attracted in retail businesses by bits of the business that are quite unformed and messy, I would say. Mm-hmm. So kind of emerging functions within a business or emerging technologies within a business, I've always been really interested in. So I asked to move into an e-commerce team within a big fashion business that I was working for at the time in the UK, when really it was not an attractive team to go on to. It was like, why would you want to go onto that team? Because I think fashion and e-commerce were unproven at that point. It was probably, close to kind of 18, 20, nearly 20 years ago that I went into that. And by that point, it was classed as like a store in your portfolio. Oh, it's the 25th biggest store, the e-commerce channel. Why would you want to go and work in the 25th biggest store in the business? But I found it really fascinating, the idea of kind of this access to data that you get with e-commerce, this idea of you could understand so much more about the customer, seeing, how customers were moving through a website versus all you got in standard retail was, product sales. You sold 3 units of this or 25 units of that. To be able to go, not only did you get a sale, but this one was looked at 1,000 times. This one was added to a cart. This is where that traffic came from. It came in on this keyword or from this traffic source, I think was just fascinating to me. So yeah, lots of things inspired me to get into it, but it's the whole ecosystem and how it fits together that still continues to inspire me in it today. Yeah, and it's definitely no longer the 25th largest store, right? It's become way more important. Way more important. And I think like the times that we're in now, you look at businesses who are trying to very, very rapidly retrofit digital as a bigger part of their strategy. I was reading a really interesting article the other day that was saying, it's almost the first time in many traditional bricks and mortar businesses that have had e-commerce channels, but probably the first time that their e-commerce teams have been properly funded and properly under the scrutiny of the executive team because of the value that the executive team realise that they can add. So I think this acceleration that you're seeing is going to be backed up by, businesses reorganizing themselves very, very rapidly around. And probably the first proper iteration we'll have seen of omnichannel, despite the term being around probably for like 10 years now. So yeah, very, very interesting times. Definitely. And that leads me to my next question, which is what we're seeing is
digital transformation on a rapid scale, but your experience in the past few years have been at pure play e-commerce retailers, ASOS and Made. So does digital transformation happen there, or what does transformation mean when you're in an all digital environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think there is this definition of digital transformation sitting as putting in digital technologies into non-digital kind of legacy businesses. But the truth is, all digital transformation is perpetual now. There is constant transformation because technology is constantly moving. And even in pure play businesses, ASOS was, quite an old e-commerce company, because it was founded a few months after Amazon. So they still had, big tech legacy debt to move out of old kind of, fairly fixed and archaic systems into much more nimble ones. Big projects running on things like changing to microservices architectures that give you much, much more flexibility in building fast and iterating really great customer experiences in digital product solutions. So there is a huge amount of transformation that happens in digital first businesses as well. There is still a requirement for joined up teams and tech and systems. And as I said, the technology is evolving so rapidly. Also, I think another thing that's coming in more and more now is you're seeing digital first businesses kind of add in core parts and new parts of business models that sit underneath them. So whether that's, a business like Made looking at things like rental propositions, for example, or businesses who put marketplaces onto kind of digitally native brands on top of them, that all requires then digital transformation that underpins it. So it's pretty perpetual, I would say.
And aside from that digital transformation that's completely ongoing, even at pure play retailers, are there other types of transformations, like around organizational structures or people that you're aware or that you're leaning into?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges of fast growing e-com businesses that I've experienced, both at ASOS and also at Made, is how you set yourself up to grow and expand internationally. It's there's a very traditional model of international expansion that sits within bricks and mortar retail businesses, which is largely based on having quite big kind of teams and infrastructure based in that country. E-commerce kind of blows all of that apart, but a lot of e-commerce businesses have tended to put fairly traditional organizational structures in place to answer problems that don't necessarily exist in the e-commerce world. So, there's some fairly big kind of reorganizations that I've overseen in both of those businesses that help kind of teams get set up for what the different requirements of customers actually are in countries, and actually where you can generate much better outcomes by producing centralized teams who can operate cross-border. I think one of the things that's starting to happen, fueled really by social media, is geographical boundaries are becoming less important in customer experience, because we are becoming more homogenized in our ability to consume digital experiences cross-border, fueled by the likes of Instagram and Facebook and all of those guys. And I think if TikTok has taught us anything over the last few months, is how rapidly in any kind of level of localization, and actually it's one of the incredibly enjoyable things about it, is consuming content from vastly different parts of the world, but it all kind of makes sense. And I think there's transformation that needs to happen in e-commerce businesses that understands that change that's happening in the broader world.
That's awesome. I'm definitely a fan of Irish TikTok. There's like a hashtag because
the
accents are
don't even start me on TikTok. I'm utterly fascinated with the platform, because I think it's got so many interesting facets that are saying a lot about how the world is moving in a broader sense. But I think it's absolutely fascinating how creators are working on that platform. Just amazing.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely something that has cropped up on my radar, and I've engaged a lot of it because of lockdown. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears a bit. And as I mentioned earlier, you're very focused on the customer throughout your career. In fact, at ASOS, you had the title Global Customer Development Director.
Mm,
And now at Made, you have merchandising, product, marketing, logistics, but also customer service and
mm.
customer experience under your remit. So, how does customer centricity play into your career? What's your philosophy around it? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. I'm like eternally grateful to the education I had in what customer centricity means at ASOS. It was the absolute bedrock of how ASOS was built, and taught me a huge amount about it. ASOS's founder, I think I can remember him having a conversation with him once, telling me about a mentor that he had that said, Nick, all you have to do is follow the customer and they will always reward you. So listen and build the business for the customer up, and then everything else will follow. And we used to say at ASOS, every pound or every dollar that you invest in building the customer proposition is eternal, and every pound that you spend on trying to market that proposition, if you've not built it in the right way, is all heat loss through the organization. So that really kind of, and I probably didn't appreciate just how profound that was, and what a way ASOS worked in that way, just as an entire organization was geared up for that, until actually it came into Made, and you see how, which is also a customer-centric organization, but slightly differently built up. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the way that we maniacally focused on it in ASOS. We would look at something like putting free returns into Australia, which on paper as a business case could just be an exponentially expensive thing to do. And we would go ahead and go, what do you need to believe that the customer will reward us with in terms of behavior, in terms of lifetime value, in terms of increasing conversion, in terms of taking the pressure off our cost of acquisition, in order to make you believe that the outflow of cash from giving free returns will make it make sense. And when you construct a business case like that, which is built upon doing the right thing for the customer, you get a very different outcome to if you just build it on how much is this going to take out of my P&L, just giving free returns. Well, of course I would never do it. And of course, when you do something like that and take the risk and put in a proposition that on paper could look very costly to a financial team, but you have some assumptions built around changes in customer behavior that are about the customer rewarding you for the investment that you've made in them, you get a very, very different business and different outcome. I always kind of say to teams, the relationship that we have with the customer is an exchange in value. It is a value exchange that sits between you as the customer and me as the retailer. And I have to give you value in order for you to give me your value back, which is you paying for my products. So the more I invest in you, the more you're going to invest back in me. And it becomes a very kind of, a very good and strong kind of, positive relationship in that way. So bringing that into Made, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to kind of, Made is a very kind of acquisition focused business because it's worked traditionally on a kind of a fairly low repeat cycle. But as we're adding in more and more products, we're able to start thinking about building that proposition for the customer in the same way, going, what does the customer need us to do? What do we need to do better for them? That's then our problem of how we work out whether we can afford to do it. But the first thing is we have to listen to what the customer is telling us. And that conversation happens every day now, every single day.
That's amazing. I like the idea of, what value do you bring to the customer? How do you build that business case? And then kind of working out and removing the obstacles as you go to just make that financially more sensible than just rolling it out entirely without understanding the impact. So that's amazing. Are there other ways? Because you've talked about, a lot of philosophy and you had great quotes from your mentor. How do you make and align your teams to be customer centric? Like, what is the execution of that philosophy look like?
I mean, the easiest way or the most effective way of doing it is putting the customer at the heart of all of your reporting, right? It comes back to that simple thing of, you know, if you set the KPI, then you'll get the outcomes of the KPI that you need to have. So we talk a lot more now about customer measures on a daily basis. So I think a lot of people tend to, there's a real thing within retail where it's always that Monday morning meeting and you're like, oh, what was the sales last week? Much more now, I think you'll find in truly customer focused organizations, and certainly we do, we'll have a conversation of how many customers shopped with us last week? What was the repeat rate last week? What was the lifetime value of our most engaged segments compared to our least engaged segments? What do customers who are not performing in line with our expectations look like? What are the characteristics and what could we do better there? So I think you set teams up by you set the KPIs, and once you're setting customer-based KPIs, and in fact, like all of our forecasting at Made now runs off customer KPIs. So we almost build the P&L customer facing up. So we will talk about planning for next year, starting with who's in the active base, how much will they shop with us next year? What are the projects that we have in place that will drive frequency out of the existing base next year? And what are we expecting that to do? How many new customers do we need to acquire next year? And what would be the channels and the content that would engage with those customers? So you're really almost building the business right from the bottom up with the customer in mind. And that changes teams. And as soon as you set that rhythm in place, you will find very quickly that teams really, really respond to that. And you stop talking about sales and you start talking about customers instead.
That's awesome. Great insights into how to build a customer first business. Are there other KPIs, maybe unusual ones that you look at when it comes to evaluating your success with customers?
Yeah, I mean, we spend, we're a very data-driven business, incredibly smart group of people, very, very brilliant kind of analytics team. But as well as all of that kind of data and the numbers that flow behind it, we also look an awful lot at qualitative data, perhaps more so than any other business I've worked in. So, I mean, I think most businesses will look at NPS, and we certainly do the same, but we will look at the kind of free text fields within the NPS just as much as we look at the number in itself. Mm-hmm. So we are very, very engaged with Trustpilot and looking at Trustpilot data on a daily basis in the business, and turning qual data into action, particularly around, I mean, there's several projects that have come out of the back of that, but one of the ones that springs to mind immediately that's come off qual data is packaging levels, which is always a huge challenge in furniture because you have a very strange balance to achieve in packaging, where people want their products to be very, very well packaged because nobody wants to wait, for that beautiful oak dining room table and then find that it gets delivered with a chip or a dent or a scratch. So you have to package really, really well, but also people hate huge quantities of packaging. Right. Because they don't like the environmental damage, they don't like, disposing of it. So, one of the projects that we're running out of Trustpilot qualitative data is how do you find the right balance of reducing packaging? How do you move to things like honeycomb cardboard versus styrofoam, and how do people feel about that once you start dispatching it? And you can get really good insight of qual data like that. So that's just an example of where perhaps numbers don't tell all of the story, but you have to listen to qualitative data to get there.
That's great. That's such a fascinating example too, that you wouldn't necessarily think about the packaging experience from the customer standpoint of environmental, and then the time that it takes to dispose of it. I'm going to switch gears slightly. I'm always fascinated by the international part of the businesses you've been in, and how does the fact that you have customers, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but how does the fact that you have customers in multiple countries impact your customer centricity approach?
Yeah, it's like I said, we touched on this. It's like the differences and the similarities, and I think that's how I put it. I think we did a really deep level of work on this when I was in ASOS, and the same really applies to Made as well. understanding what the differences are between customers in different countries and how you need to get the proposition to respond and where the similarities lie. And that is different for every business, I think. It is super important to then build that proposition up. So again, I'll give an example. People tend to err to the side of thinking that one of the things that you have to do really differently in each country is marketing. So an ad campaign couldn't possibly look or feel the same in Germany as in the UK. And therefore you would tend to find that teams will want to do kind of very localized advertising. Mm-hmm. When you really drill down into it, depending on your customer type, and certainly we found this at ASOS, actually there is more in common with 20 somethings now in Germany as there is in kind of, California. Right. And actually they don't necessarily require highly localized marketing campaigns, again, because understanding the consumer and the fact that they're consuming global propositions through things like social media every day, it makes sense, right? But things that do need to be really highly localized are things like payment types. So actually, and delivery services, like delivery partners and carriers, like knowing who is a great carrier in the territory or in the market and who isn't. Knowing customer services is a good example. There are different expectations internationally for things like phone versus live chat channels. In markets like Germany, they still prefer to use the telephone. In UK, you can have a completely phoneless contact center. So I think it's like going through and how I found it works best is if you can kind of get those bits of the experience categorized. So you go, right, customer services, payment types, languages, marketing, performance marketing versus brand marketing, PR, all of those things, and go, right, on a kind of from MVP to best in class, which is super localized, is kind of best in class for some things, versus actually, it can be the same everywhere. We can then sort of build a maturity model that sits around each market. And that's how I found it kind of best to work with teams, is you go, right, what do we need to do in this market on this particular area to really win? And let's be really, really clear on whether that is different from other markets or not. And then actually your organizational design can flow quite naturally out of the back of that, because again, you're very, very customer first focused, and you're like, oh, actually, in these particular groups of markets here, all of these things, performance marketing, don't need to be highly localized. So that's a centralized team that can run that, versus something like payments or customer services, where you may go, actually, I don't need a decentralized team, but I'm definitely going to need to understand the landscape more deeply from a local level in order to make that work and get to the true scale I want to be.
Excellent. That's so fascinating to think that, with global media and global celebrities, that the marketing aspect may not be as different as you expect, but the operations of the business definitely still needs to be localized, because there are different methods and expectations from that standpoint. So great insights. That's really fascinating. I'm going to switch gears and ask you our favorite question here at Becoming Retail, which is, if you had one word to describe the retail industry, what would it be and why?
Oh my goodness. This is that's a tough one. One word only.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a hyphenated phrase.
I'm going to say it's either for me. It's gonna. I can't narrow it down to one. I'm gonna have to do. I'll give you one, and then I'll give you another one that's my close second. Then, so I'd either say it's either connection or relationships. Like retail. I think you go back to how we first started communicating with each other, and cross-border trade or trade between tribes, right back into kind of the dark ages. That is how we built connections with each other. I have something you need, you have something I need, is one of the most basic forms, I think, of human communication, of how we built relationships with each other. And I think that still exists today. It is an incredibly connection-driven kind of industry. And I think that's what still makes me love it, kind of, 20 odd years in. I'm still fascinated by the new ways that we build connection through retail with each other. And you know, with the year that we've been through, I think we're starting to see that, you know, there's still miles and miles of space for us to build those connections ever more effectively through how we use digital technology to do that. You know, I think in lockdown, back to our TikTok conversation earlier, in lockdown, we've, you know, building connection with each other through our devices has made this bearable. You know, I think, and retailers, you know, being a part of that, like when we've been in our homes this year and we have felt isolated, sometimes, you know, buying something from a brand and you know, making yourself feel a bit better or connecting with a friend through a digital device is, I think, it's kept us going in some way. And I think retail has a big part to play in that.
Yeah, I agree. And in some cases, you know, the trip to the grocery store was the highlight of our week, to go out and see other people and you know, see what's on offer. So it's been a lifeline for our household.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a great word, connection and relationship. I really like those. And speaking of the situation, we really can't have a conversation about retail without talking about the pandemic. So first, I want to kind of get your sense of what has the situation taught you about yourself as a leader?
Yeah, I think oh God, that is such an interesting one. I think it's been a really tough year for everybody. Yeah. Like, I think, you know, we're all quite tired, and I think you can see that in teams. I think it's really made me question kind of, you know, my personal resilience and also identity as a leader. And I think a lot of the leadership team at Made, and I know friends who are kind of in senior leadership positions within retail as well, it makes you realize how much of your leadership capability was built behind this idea of seeing people face to face. And which I guess is the same for all leadership positions. Actually, you're not there kind of doing a task on a day-to-day basis. Actually, I would say that, you know, 90% of my job is finding the blockers that exist for teams in an organization and helping them remove them. And when you're isolated and when you're at home and when you're learning how to do that from behind a screen, it's really tough. You have to find a new leadership style. You have to connect with the organization in a different way. I mean, for me, I would go, I'm really good in an office when I'm having kind of, you know, corridor conversations with each other and, you know, dipping into a meeting and kind of saying hi to a group of people I happen to see in a room. I find it a lot more uncomfortable to sort of put myself out there and try and drop in when you're having to do it digitally. So I think, you know, I've had to find new ways of maintaining a connection with the rest of the organization. And that's taught me a lot about my own communication preferences and style that maybe I wasn't quite so aware of before. So yeah,
that's great. I can certainly empathize. Yeah, it's. I don't think the office is going away anytime soon.
No,
after like 7 months of this.
Yeah, me neither. I think. Yeah, I look around actually, and we're doing a lot of kind of digging around, looking at how contemporaries in retail across the UK are thinking about office spaces going forward. I mean, I'm sure it's a global issue. Who would want to be a commercial landlord at the moment?
Right.
Not many. But yeah, and I think it's yeah, I know a number of businesses who are just going, right, that's it, remote 100%. I don't know. I think retail's such a tactile business. I think particularly in kind of like when you're looking at products, you're feeling products, you know, there's still a lot of human relationship kind of and physical stuff that sits in there. I can't see us ever going 100% remote. But I think offices are going to have to take on a whole new way of thinking and organizing themselves.
I agree. And then I'd love to get your professional take on the impact that the pandemic is happening. What do you see the future of retail is given the situation?
I think I think when you look, I mean, interestingly, in the UK, the September retail results have just come out, and actually retail in the UK has had a really positive month. It's actually been up on the year and up on the previous month as well, which is the first time we've seen that since the start of the pandemic in the UK. So I think there is undoubtedly parts of retail that are really, really suffering. I think it's those retailers who don't have strong digital propositions are going to suffer. But I think retail as a whole is in a massive kind of shift and a massive change. But I think is still a fundamentally growing kind of part of the economy. And I think you see this in the number of really small kind of producers who are setting up kind of direct to consumer businesses for the first time as a result of the pandemic, who are running businesses off Facebook, who are kind of, reaching consumers directly when they were B2B businesses before, and they're now going direct to consumer for the first time. I think you're seeing an explosion of kind of creativity within retail that we've not seen for a while. So I think you're seeing a massive kind of pull forward of channel shift into online. I think legacy retailers will either get on the back of that or will fail. So I think there is something like a Darwinian process happening at the moment, where there will be people who come out of it, businesses who come out of it much, much stronger, much more advanced in their kind of like blend of digital and physical retail. I think you see an explosion of kind of small producers reaching consumers, using social media platforms and using platforms like Shopify in a way that you've never seen before, because all of the barriers are removed, right? It's so easy to reach consumers through digital platforms now. I think you're going to see an incredible explosion in retail businesses over the next few years. So, I mean, maybe naively, but I'm massively optimistic about the changes that are happening, despite the fact that it undoubtedly, and I can't take away from the fact that it's a crisis, and it's a very, very, very tough situation for lots of our colleagues in the industry. But I think that we will come through it in a much stronger and much more evolved position.
That's great. I agree that it's tough situation, but a lot of things have been accelerated digitally. Everything was on the roadmap, but we haven't gotten to the part where people are now launching new things that they had to launch because of the situation. So I kind of expect like a burst of innovation for next year, because everyone was scrambling to just pull forward already baked in plans. But what are we thinking of behind the scenes? I think next year might be a really interesting year for innovation.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Well, thank you so much, Nicola. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. I've learned so much. I appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you again for being on Becoming Retail.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.